Everybody, Jeremy Dickinson here. In this video, I want to spend some time talking about well-being theories within the context of a value theory. So when one works out a value theory, one tries to figure out those things that are intrinsically good, those things that are intrinsically bad. And when one tries to figure out a theory of well-being, one tries to figure out among the things that are intrinsically good, intrinsically bad, which are also intrinsically good for us, intrinsically bad for us. So it's in some cases, perhaps many cases, true that the things that contribute to our well-being levels are a subset of the things that were identified as intrinsically good, intrinsically bad in our value theories. So when one does value theory, one wants to know what things are by their very nature good, what things are by their very nature are bad. When one does a theory of well-being, one tries to figure out what things are by their very nature good for us, what kinds of things by their very nature are bad for us. In this way, then, when we do a theory of well-being, we're trying to figure out, well, what are the things that essentially or fundamentally contribute to our well-being levels? What makes our life fundamentally get better or get worse, as the case may be? So that's just broadly speaking what we do when we work out theories of well-being. Again, it takes place within the context of a value theory. And if you have more questions about what value theory is, I invite you to watch my value theory videos. Just do a YouTube search for them, and you'd be able to find them, no problem. Okay, so if you do have any issues with that, just send me a message below, and I'd be happy to direct you and guide you in any way. Okay, so theories of well-being. A couple different ways you can go. You can try to say there's only one thing that is intrinsically good for us, only one thing that's intrinsically bad for us, or you can develop a theory according to which there's more than one thing that's intrinsically good for us, intrinsically bad for us. Now, just for simplicity's sake, let's maybe focus on the things that are intrinsically good for us, and we'll talk about intrinsic badness only when it's necessary. We can make the relevant changes and additions quite simply. Okay, so there's monists, those who say there's one thing that's intrinsically good for us, and there are pluralists, those who say there's more than one thing that's intrinsically good for us. Now, an example of a kind of monism would be a theory of hedonism. Hedonism would have it that there's only one thing that's intrinsically good for us, and that's pleasure. There's another theory according to which desire-satisfaction is the only thing that's intrinsically good for us. Those are paradigmatic examples of monistic theories of value, monistic theories of well-being, more accurately. In the context of pluralistic theories which have it that there's more than one thing that's intrinsically good for us, sometimes we just call this view an objective list view, because there's a list of things that are identified, at least two, there could be more, that are identified as intrinsically good for us. And the important point about this view is that each of the things that's identified as intrinsically good for us isn't reducible to the other. Or if there's more than two, then none of the items identified is reducible to any of the other things identified as intrinsically good for us. Okay, so that's called an objective list view as an example of a pluralistic view. An example might go like this. Happiness is intrinsically good for us. Pleasure is intrinsically good for us. Virtue is intrinsically good for us. And friendship is intrinsically good for us. That's a possible a theory of well-being. Now, we don't need to get into the nuts and bolts of that theory just yet. Let's turn our attention back to the monistic theories, and let's lock in on hedonism and desire-satisfactionism, something that they both have in common that's interesting and worth noting. They are both subjectivist theories at their base. What that means is that what turns out to be good for us fundamentally is dependent on the individual who is experiencing. There's going to be a dependence on there's going to be a dependence, excuse me, on the individual's capacity or the individual taste for pleasure, just like there's going to be a dependence on an individual's capacity or a set of desires that determine the how well the life is going for that individual. So there might be plenty of overlap in terms of the things that tend to produce pleasant states in us and things that tend to produce states where our desires are satisfied in us. But the theory admits of and allows for the individual in question to determine which pleasures count as pleasant, or which experiences count as pleasant more accurately, and which things count properly as desires for the individual. So they're subjectivist in that way. So the things that are intrinsically good for us are dependent on us, dependent on our psychology, as it were. The opposite view would have it that there are things that are intrinsically good for us, even if our psychology isn't geared to enjoy them, or isn't geared to our desire sets. So this is sometimes called an objective view, because there's not a dependence on the psychology of the individual or any other physiological fact about the individual to determine whether or not the thing in question is good for that individual. So an example may make sense because it's pretty abstract. Think about virtue. It might be true, according to the objectivist about well-being, that being virtuous is good for someone, even if that person doesn't desire to be virtuous. Or suppose someone doesn't desire or care about happiness in any way, shape, or form. The objectivist says that it's still good for that person to be happy. So that's what the objectivist is going to say about well-being, in contrast to the subjectivist. So the general distinction has been drawn, and I bring it up because the philosopher I want to talk about is Chris Heathwood in the remaining part of this video. Chris Heathwood is a desire satisfaction theorist, and according to him, the thing that's intrinsically good for us is having our desire satisfied. And he wants to try to motivate the basis behind the subjectivism that is implicit in his theory by having us imagine someone who has all kinds of pleasant experiences, has virtue, has knowledge, has plenty of friendships, and all the rest. But this person doesn't care about these things. He doesn't desire any of these things. He happens to have them, but he doesn't in any significant way desire them. Heathwood wants to ask us whether or not this life is going well for this person. And he thinks that intuitively we're going to think that this person's life isn't going well for him or her, as the case may be. And this is because this person doesn't care about the thing in question. This person isn't getting any of what he or she wants. And this is the kind of intuition that that guides many subjectivist theories of well-being. Whatever is good for us has to be something that we care about. And in Heathwood's theory, what we care about is what we have desires for. So if you're trying to understand the subjectivist theory and what at bottom is motivating it, I think it's this thought that Heathwood asks in some of his works. Now in Heathwood's view, then, having your desire satisfied is intrinsically good for you. When you have your desire satisfied, no matter what they are, all things being equal, your life is going better for you. When your desires are frustrated, then all things being equal, your life is going worse for you. That's the view. But the view needs to respond to some challenges, and Heathwood's very aware of these challenges. They're prevalent challenges, and Heathwood's well aware of the fact that you can't just state the theory, you've got to defend it against objections. And so he wants it in his works to spend some time devoted to responding to these objections, to show that his theory can really handle the problems that are presented to it. So what I want to do is, in the next few minutes to conclude this video, is talk about some problems that he considers and his responses to them. So one prevalent problem is a problem of what I call pointless desires. It seems like people can have pointless desires. And if one can have pointless desires, then when those desires are satisfied, it doesn't seem like when they're satisfied that the satisfaction contributes to the person's well-being. It's not good for the person that those pointless desires were satisfied. So well, what's an example? Suppose Jones loves to count the blades of grass in his backyard. He has such a strong desire to do so. So he spends his time in his backyard counting blades of grass, and when he finishes counting them all, desire is satisfied. That's good for him. Intuition. No, it's not. It's not good for him. Okay? So the problem of pointless desires. Well, Heathwood's going to say to that one, well, look, that's his desire. It's satisfied. He's getting what he wants, so his life's going well for him. That's not too big of a problem. Okay? So he's not too concerned with the pointless desires objection, even though there's something counterintuitive about saying that these pointless desires can contribute to one's life going well for them once they're satisfied. Okay, so that's one problem. But what about the problem of murderous desires? What about the problem of having desires to have people murdered? I mean, isn't that bad for the person? Look, desire-satisfactionism doesn't rule out these kinds of desires and say, oh no, in this case, it's bad for the person to have those desires satisfied. No, I mean, not for Heathwood. His view is very general in this way. And so what Heathwood has us do is has us think about Ted Bundy. There's Ted Bundy. He has these murderous desires. Ted Bundy, for those of you who don't know, was a serial killer. And Ted Bundy has these murderous desires. He has them satisfied. And what Heathwood has to say is that his life is going well for him when he has his murderous desire satisfied. Okay? His well-being is enhanced when he has his desire satisfied. When he murders people, because by murdering people, he has his murderous desire satisfied. Now, what's important here is we need to distinguish between having your desire satisfied and your life going well for you, and acting morally. So Heathwood was going to say, yeah, he's acting immorally. He's acting terribly. Okay, he's an immoral guy while he's doing these atrocious acts. He's committing these atrocious crimes. But that's a different kind of issue. So we needn't confuse, we shouldn't confuse Ted Bundy's immoral behavior with the issue of whether or not his life's going well for him by having his desire satisfied. So we tend to have our intuitions about his immoral behavior bleed into our intuitions about his levels of well-being, says Heathwood. So even Ted Bundy's life's going well for him when his murder desires are satisfied. You have to bite that bullet. So with respect to the pointless desires, with respect to the murderous desires, Heathwood's willing to bite the bullet. Now Heathwood, again, he's a desire satisfaction theorist. He also wants to remain true to the subjectivist element within it. Now, there's more that I want to say about desire satisfactionism, and more that I want to say about well-being. I'll do so in my next video, so look for part 2 of my video lecture series on this topic. Thanks for watching.